Dzień dobry Państwu. O, działa.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It works. First applause for working mic. Radio stuff with his mic off, that would be something. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. I would ask you to introduce yourself. So, President, please. Dear redactor, it's just like in radio. My name is Beata Stelmach, and every day I have a pleasure to work with a group of 7,000 people in Sportowy Totalizator. We are present in the whole Poland with our branches, and you know perfectly our products. Everyone dreams about happiness, everyone crosses his lucky numbers, and perhaps today we will keep returning to that because we work in the form of state monopoly. Marcin Kubicza, hello ladies and gentlemen, head of a department of strategic projects in Ministry of State Assets. In practice, I overlook on Polish defense sector, and I'm a head of supervision council of PZU SA. My name is Maciej Głogowski. I'm a redactor of Tok FM, and I will moderate this panel, though we are missing one participant. As soon as he is here, we will ask him thoroughly why he's not on time with us. But the matter of our panel, how to deregulate without causing harm. Do we need state monopolies, and if so, where? So the question, do we need state monopolies, was added here with, I believe, in a controversial attempt to provoke you, President Beata, because you would definitely say that state needs a state monopoly, I believe. Therefore, I will provoke some discussion. Let's say that I think we don't need a state monopoly, and state should not be involved in gambling, which is Totalizator Sportowy. How do you answer? Of course, my position is different. State does not engage in gambling. State gave us this task. Since monopoly is often considered to be something bad, especially like described in books, or in Poland, it immediately brings into our eyes some old times when everything was in state's ownership. The monopoly in gambling games is quite recent thing. So nowadays, when a huge portion of our life is in digital form, I will say that from until 2014, state also controls internet casinos, gambling in an organized way. And I will try to justify why it is important not to move away from this model, and why it's important that state would control us. Only state can handle with this. Yes, and it has the right partner that it can oversight, monitor and control, and at the same time to provide discipline so that playing was safe. If you would like to go back to this subject, we will go back to it in a moment. Are we ready? Yes, I'm ready, and I have many arguments. So the principle is that everyone presents himself, and for you, Mr. President, we will have a special task. So now a few moments for you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pustelnik, and for some time now I'm the first deputy mayor of the city of Łódź. That's why I came a little bit late here. And I was in a little bit rush because I was just leaving our meeting. I came straight here from Warsaw, and portions of highway would be faster walked than drived in these traffic jams in Warsaw. Well, I came here from suburbs of Warsaw, just to say. At the same time, I wanted to really apologize, our dear moderator and you, dear guests, for my untimely arrival. Not a problem. We are talking about deregulations, Mr. Director, you said you supervise the defense sector. From your perspective, state should be a solid owner of a huge portion of defense sector of each state, including Polish Republic. Paraphrasing, your question was addressed, do we need a monopoly in gambling? I wanted to just answer with a question. Do you believe that we don't need any monopolies in the state? But because if we need some monopolies, then for the sake of the security in critical infrastructure sectors, energy sectors, those are these aspects where state should definitely act. I agree that there are surfaces, sectors where state should be present, like a postal service. This activity is out of interest of any other enterprises because it's not a profitable task. Not delivering a court notifications, don't get me wrong, but delivering all the state notifications to all addresses, it has to be provided, this kind of service, postal service to all people. But you try to convince me to what? To monopoly in gambling? Or that state is obliged towards its population to have in certain sectors? Okay, fully agreed. And what about defense system? Like we see in our country, we have one big subject that has not any special principles or treatment. There are enterprises in Polish defense group. It's more than 1,000 private subjects in our group. Mr. President, for you, this level we can lower down from state level to self-governmental level to the city level. You also believe that the monopoly and in the hands of the state or the city, self-government, is necessary, at least at some sections, some sectors. Dear editor, dear ladies and gentlemen, self-governments are an integral part of state. So what happens on a level over our resort, our self-government, often has a direct proportional influence on what happens in cities and towns in Poland. So we are interested in that, and it concerns us even more. When it comes to monopolies, I have deep beliefs of someone who was traditionally called an HD, Hadek. But let me quote one of a Nobelist award receivers, Stiglitz. Why invisible hand of market is invisible? Because it's not there. So I don't know if I can fully agree with this quote, but I'm deeply sure that this hand of state, public sector hand, should at some areas be present and in others even keep very strong certain elements. I will give you some example, an example of deregulation of liberal economies. As such an example, we can look at American economy. The solutions that were accepted there, American economy is one of those where state interferes very strongly. It's very visible, very present, even from levels that, let's say, defense level, you can't see it straight because we say Lockheed Martin, Boeing. Those are private entities, or SpaceX. Without direct involvement of the state, none of these subjects would exist. So I believe it's not coincidental that after the change of the power in the US, big portion of CEOs of private companies that we all know are on conferences, on meetings with President Trump, and they start their statements with, "Thank you, Mr. President, your leadership is great." No matter that some years ago they sympathized with other parties. So different states, different areas have their regulations and maybe different solutions, but I don't know any equally effective functioning economy of so-called Western world and wider, where we don't have segments, where the head of that state leviathan would be more or less present. And it's a similar analogy can be applied with city level. And that's a problem that we just drawed. So you agree with that in total. You can have different opinion with certain details, but generally you agree. I sense a problem how to have a discussion in these circumstances. I think we agree because we understand the problem in such a way, because we had a chance to think about it. Because we talk about state monopoly, that's where you started, state monopoly on a gambling market. And I would like to, perhaps we will talk broader about that, but let's deal with why we started with gambling sector. So entertainment sector, and I want it to be said clearly. Totalizator Sportowy, the contractor that fulfills this function for the state, is a bit other subject than any other commercial entity that is profit-oriented from a widely understood economy sector. Why is it different? Well, because we manage emotions, we organize entertainment world, but in fact we do care and we consider potential social costs, because gambling is nothing else than a beginning of a good fun, but at some point we tend to fall into dependency, and at some point this space is opening, this space, this duty is posed on us, the obligation to care about a player, a person who cannot manage his emotion, their emotions, in such a way to refrain from another attempt to win back, to handle these emotions. Things that person can believe, until now I failed, but statistics would say that at some point I have to win back. So when we talk about social costs, it's management of the sector and managing these emotions in such a way so that player knew consequences of his being lost in a casino. So I would like to tell you, maybe not all of you had a chance to play in this kind of internet casino. State has a monopoly there. What I said before, most of our businesses, our activity is transferred to a digital world. Hence, the offer was also designed according to the 21st century's demands. Customers, players also require products in a digital form. So we talk about internet casino. So each player who becomes our customer is not anymore anonymous. We have very similar procedures as during opening a bank account. We not only know who are we dealing with, first and last name, but we also are obliged by an act on counteracting money laundering. So all the AML procedures are also applied. We need to know where our player has money. Maybe they come from illegal source, how much a player is ready to spend on the game and how much time he's ready to spend at the computer. So we agree, we sign certain contract with our client. Of course, it is a player's decision and the risk, how much money he wants to sacrifice. But we also take part of responsibility for that. If player loses his control, and if he wants to break his promise before himself, we interfere and we say, stop, you are breaching certain boundary, and we take things in our hands so that it would still be safe entertainment. So we forbid to play longer?
There are several stages, and we apply technology, algorithms that suggest how the player behaves. There are some stages we say, get a break. I wouldn't like to interrupt you, but to arrange the things. The organizers recommended this conversation to be a response somehow, whether we need state monopolies. When I'm listening to you, I have questions coming up to my hand. On the one hand, there are lots of regulated markets that have specific laws, and they are in the hands of private entrepreneurs. And you can't impose, you can't have certain responsibility towards the customer. You mentioned bank accounts, counteracting money laundering, that also in this market. But then we have various service suppliers. I need to admit, I do not feel a partner to talk about gambling as such. I have my human ideas. I do not support it. I believe that a serious threat, or it may lead to a serious threat, just like other addictions we have and we fight against. I'm a bit worried when the state offers something and then the provider says they will prevent the effects of their offer, like alcohol or hazard. So for me, it's a bit illogical, and it's easy for me to say people can make it without some things. Let's get it to your idea. There are spheres of life where the state authority is necessary. I believe there is a significant difference between state's presence in different sectors and a monopoly. Monopoly kills competition. For us, on the other side, the citizens, the customers, is not healthy. No monopoly is healthy. Perhaps some individual cases. My point is, if we are supposed to answer this question, let's say we distinguish state monopoly from state's engagement in certain areas. Of course, that's what I wanted to say. We will agree that state's presence in some sectors is a must. And we need to say how much of it, not that it should be the monopoly. I believe there were such debates in the beginning of 1990s. There were no freedom games. Yes, there were games. It's difficult to find any area outside of gambling where the state enjoys full monopoly. Well, to be precise, there are areas when the state has dominant monopolistic position. We have this great fuel corporation with dominant position on the distribution of wholesale fuels. When you go down, there is competition. All right, when you enter the state and the state's share in each sector, apart from the competition, in the case of monopolies, we have the influence of politicians and this ever-present topic. It very much depends on who's at power. But there is this impact of politicians gaining benefits from the state's presence in a sector, in a company. So you're back to how much of the state, not the state monopoly. Which Polish monopoly reduces competition, apart from gambling, transmission network, water supplies? But we agreed that monopoly reduces competition by definition. We haven't go into analysis. Do you want monopolies or not? Yes, in some areas. Energy security, transmission grids, no shadow of a doubt here. You can't imagine handing it over to a competitive corporation. In case of any crisis, we may have a major issue. The second issue, providing basic services like water supplies. True. You can't imagine that being handed over to the market and let the invisible hand of the market decide. But you like market? Yeah, yes, of course. I only need to say that now the Polish armament group is open to cooperation with private entrepreneurs. We run events where we meet such businesses and we work with them. So I'm very much for it, but only when it's safe for the state. We need to also remember one more thing. It's all good when it's good. When a crisis arrives, the citizens, everybody, wants the state to interfere. Because, okay, we can agree that there is a state understood as zero social services. If you give it all to the market, you may have your private armies. No, that wouldn't be that simple. I disagree. Making agreements with the state without a social structure. But the state is a social contract. So a variant of social contract we live in. Well, these things can be intellectual, theoretical constructs, but whatever considerations I've recently heard about this interesting thesis that either you have Swedish spendings or Irish taxes. They never come together. That may be true, but considering any orthodoxies is useless today. I believe that we have common views in major quantifiers because it's shaped by reality. Back in 1990s, my late father started his business, and he was a far-going liberal, thinking that everything should be created, regulated, and run by entrepreneurs. I had a period in my life when this idea tempted me, but starting from a moment when I took responsibility for certain segments in the public sphere, I started to observe other places in the world, and I believe there is supra-political, supra-ideological consensus that the state abdication from active role in the economy is something that will never happen. Okay. I feel challenged to encourage you, sir, to the dialogue. So at the end you can say, you persuaded me. The state monopoly in gambling market is needed. It's my challenge. I will start to persuade you. First of all, do not put an equal mark between gambling and other sectors. Hazard, gambling is not the first need. If we're supposed to abolish the state monopoly and turn gambling into a free market, invite competitors, so we will create free market economy in gambling. That would mean all the entities will use all the marketing and advertising tools to attract customers. The question is our job to maximize the profit, so pull citizens into the gambling market? That's the purpose of advertising. Today's regulations are that we cannot advertise for our services, just like banks advertise for theirs. Why? It's not to maximize the profit, but to take care of the safety of the players. But you can advertise for some of your products. Yes, we can. as a brand, but not a gambling service. If we have a free market situation, we would also privatize profits, but the social costs would not rest with the service providers, but with the state. Because the area of mental health, the issue of addictions, would not be the responsibility of the entities, but of the state. Now, if you look at other examples throughout the EU, Poland is not the only country with monopolies. It's the same in Norway, Finland. There are countries with no online casinos like France. But there are also countries that decided to deregulate or demonopolize this market. And today, the social costs come to the foreground. There are countries that would want to take this step back, which is difficult, if not impossible. Once you have free market, you have gamblers. Making a step back is impossible. Well, let's close it. I mean, not the meeting, but this issue. But would you agree with me? Let's finish. In some sectors, state monopoly? No. I highlight this particular question. Where do we need state monopolies? I believe the discussion about state's share would be even more interesting. I agree with your view that there are lots of sectors where the state needs to be, for I, as a citizen, needs to feel secure. There would be services that the state will provide for me. As a citizen, I would shift responsibility onto the state for something. So I agree that the state has to have an opportunity to run it. There is no difference between us. But what I said, monopoly and its various impacts on the market is not controversial. If there is a monopoly, we've experienced that in Poland, it reduces competition. And as Madam President said, if we feel we've learned competition because the market in Poland provides it, we know how good it is. No. I finally closed the topic. Please, slowly with us. Monopoly in extracting industry in Norway is justified by social needs. Oh, that would be a nice topic to discuss. How to deregulate to prevent harm. And that's the first part of our question for today. So I have a proposal. Deregulation has been very much popular in the public debate. In the beginning of the year, the Prime Minister suggested an offensive in this area. There are some actions. The legislation work on deregulation is ongoing. Some laws were signed by both former and current president, but instead of answering how to deregulate to prevent harm, we should say how to regulate but not harm, because first you need regulation to have deregulation. To prevent deregulation, we should consider how to regulate well. Mr. Mayor. Sir. I'm acting on behalf of the regulator as well, because the municipality, the city, other units where it participates have space for legislation, so it's a form of regulation. But on the more abstract general level, I think that the foundation for good legislation, for good regulations, is not to make it top-down, not assuming the omnipotence of the regulator, that they do it based on their strong convictions, but with the engagement of entities that are supposed to be regulated. They do not need to include all the postulates because the optics or interest in some sectors may collide, but they need to consider the logic among the regulated entities, no matter what's the regulation about.
And second thing, I believe that despite the many years that passed, I think its principle is universal, maybe not always respected, though it seemed to be simple, is to, when we look at the regulation, not the numerousness and casus and the casus of these regulations, but their transparency, their understanding, clear understanding. It seemed to be something trivial, but during last 8 years in Poland, with the stability and transparency of regulations, it was not always so nice. And I think a good idea would be thing executed in America, so that practice one new act would replace few obsolete acts. It was an attempt to use a feedback loop, collecting opinions of those who are involved, and it's a constant improvement because it's not a process that we once accept one act or a piece of legislation. It's an ongoing process which never ends, actually. But it is important to have these two principles, stability and transparency, and simplification related to that at some point, to be these foundations that would stand behind this process. It sounds good. I can continue that. I took a few notes. Mr. Mayor brings example of United States. I wanted to refer to research that was done by George Washington University. My small digression in the meantime, we say that in the US, technological world is developing because everything there is a free market and Europe regulates. But regulations are a phenomena that is everywhere. Going back to that report, federal acts that are in force in United States Code, right now have more than 180,000 pages. And at the beginning of 60s of 20th century, they fit into 20 pages. In Europe, let's look at German market. A complete set of German law is now has 60% more words than 30 years ago. So even in United States, where we say that regulations do not block, they also increase. In Poland recently, we also saw an increase of number of acts, uncontrolled one. I absolutely agree that it's not about number of paragraphs, but about predictability. And when we talk about economy, participants of a free market economy, if they want to plan in a perspective, mid-term and long-term perspective, they need to know what is a legal surrounding. And if there is a dialogue between business environment and the regulator body, these regulations can change in a controlled way, but in a way that business can refer to it and prepare to it, include them in their strategic planning. The worst thing that can happen, that happens that should be not allowed is changing acts from day to day, and the lack of capacity to plan long term. That's a plague, not a number of regulated areas, but unpredictability. So a good regulation, the one I asked about, is the one that gives time, yes, and one created in a dialogue, because regulator body is not capable to regulate a given sector without looking inside, without consultation about the consequences for a given sector. That's also very interesting because we have times that I have impression that state a little bit lags behind of technological advancements. If we want to have something happening faster, state has to learn, think about it, reflect on. As if I may, I don't want to dominate on the discussion, but let's go back to the beginning of 90s when there was an idea to regulate a capital market. There were those who say, let's go spontaneous with this. Another would say, let's first regulate and then let's allow this market to develop. We chose the second model, and it turned out, I mean, of course, we don't know what would happen in the other scenario, but it turned out that this model of controlled development of a financial market paid off. It paid off because introduction into free market economy after a communist time, introducing regulated capital market, taught the participant to the right behaviors and respecting standards. So it's not that regulations are always bad. No, of course, especially a capital market is a capital example. But when we come to details and responsibilities of members of this market, it's again over regulation. Many companies with interesting history can be repulsed by this. There should be transparency between stakeholders and clients. So sometimes it is bad to go too far to the other side. So how to regulate in order that we don't have to deregulate later? Wide consultations, very broad consultations. Yes, each project of an act from government is available for public consultation. Every interested stakeholder can state their opinion about it, can comment on them. The one thing that, in my opinion, causes problems is one-point regulations. We have certain triggers, some action, something happens in the social sphere, and we have a very specific small regulation, one-point regulations that creates not so comprehensive, not so coherent system. I agree with the time and about the consultations, though we often say about consultations that are a consequence of an urgent need, then we don't have time. I think as self-government you also have certain situations like that. In the end, it's about your citizens, inhabitants of your self-government. You're expected to make some decisions, or do some regulations. It's about, there is one thing of this strategic nature that still can be a result of some temptations caused by a democracy in a modern way. I mean, when you start some regulation or you make some authority decision, no matter how long you consult that, 24 hours a day, the whole year, there is no chance to satisfy all the stakeholders. And that is what I always often see, and I'm a veteran of a social consultations. For 2 years being a plenipotentiary of a Madam Mayor, I visited basically all yards in the town, including people in widespread consultations. Is definitely something good, and I'm glad it's nowadays a broad practice. But it doesn't mean the abdication from that the regulatory body, state or whoever it is, having its own strategy. So consultations doesn't mean including and agreeing to every postulate, because then it means lack of control. So there is a discussion, and in the end there is a decision, like in business, exactly. And decision cannot include all the voices in the discussion, because you can't combine fire and water, no matter how you try, and trying to satisfy all the stakeholders with the opposite points of view, in the end makes everyone angry. My dear guests of this panel, if we talk about regulation, what we need is certain wisdom about the regulation, where this wisdom of state should come from about regulation or deregulation. These consultations, not every time they are performed. Sometimes state even decides not to ask stakeholders. You are asking about the quality of staff, because at first we choose these decision makers, then they represent our expectations. And I think that, yes, state has this wisdom under the condition that the staff is selected properly, people who represent the state. I think that the more this stuff is opened for a dialogue, these state representatives, the more they are opened, the better will be decision, because not only the world is changing, external environment, I don't mention political environment, but I mean technological, all these changes that take place in different sectors that later translate into how we function. And yet economy, I always say that the strength of the state is the strength of economy. If we have a strong economy, we can deal with any external challenges. So again, going back to the quality of staff has to also understand what's going on around. And I think, yes, a state has a mandate to deal with these regulations under the condition that they know how to interpret signals from the other side. So again, going back to the dialogue, I think that strength is in a dialogue. It's not only sharing the information, but it is learning both ways. And every time, if you had chance to see from the other side how administration is run, a central one, local one, and is later on the other side on a free market, one can better evaluate and understand, step into shoes of the other side. Did you have this kind of adventure episode? I could call it a professional adventure, the best one that I could have, to look how this administration runs. Also in a commercial business, you were not only related to the state treasury. Don't you have an impression that these worlds are so distant, so away from each other? Exactly, for someone who never was here, there and there, such someone could say these worlds are very distant. I never was, so I can say that those are worlds that complete each other, and the capacity to understand each other, this understanding and information exchange allows us to make better decisions, both on the business side and the regulatory body side, administration. We moved away a bit from our main core of the discussion, but this wisdom of a state, I believe the wisdom of a state is there also for deregulation. How do you think, Mr. Editor, a good regulation? It's a experience from recent years. I have a very nice example. Let's go back to the time when we entered EU. Then we directly received many new acts, decisions of the EU, and now we can track that all these regulations were posed higher than those required by EU directive. So if we look throughout these years, today it's now like that, because we learned as well that good enough is a good enough. What is stated in the directive is enough. We needed to learn all that. But we all made decision in 1994 by signing a treaty for association treaty that we will accept this numerous legislation.
Mr. Mayor, the wisdom of the state, local authority, town hall, deputy mayor. The older I get, the longer I live, the longer I work, the more I see the genius of the Socrates is saying, I know that I know nothing. The longer I live, the more I understand my non-understanding. So I will not say anything extraordinary. One thing, what Madam President said, before I joined local authority, I worked for a corporation, and I moved to be deputy mayor from being in a board of a major consulting institution. I can only say there is no more similar entity with similar mechanism than the large corporate and the ministry or an public institution. Only the salaries are different. In terms of mechanism, procedures, reporting circles, a corpo is a twin of a major state institution. The goals may be different, but mechanisms are very much alike. So, and responsibility. Well, from my experience with the corpo, I know that the responsibility was far lower than what I have now in any possible sense, despite the asymmetry of salaries. But in public administration, satisfaction and empowerment are higher, and that turns me on in this profession. Once you taste it, it's difficult to find similar satisfaction in another sphere, because here, as somebody said, you can touch the fruit of your work when you go past a building, a factory, you go along a road, you do it with your team. I worked in consulting, and it wasn't there. And that's why I believe there are more similarities that we can think of. Ladies and gentlemen, the discussion is formed in such a way. Your opinions were, of course, most interesting. We are trying to get the answers. Would you, in public, have any questions? Can we have the mic, please? I couldn't see who was the first one. You need to share it. And please, who is the addressee of your question? Madam President and Director Stefan Synkowski, University of Marii Skłodowska-Curie in Lublin. Madam President presented a false alternative. It's not that if we release the market, all the companies that deal with gambling need to advertise. No, there are such services that are banned from advertising. There is no issue that if you free the market, the rule applies to that sector. My hypothesis is that what's the true cause to keep their services a monopoly? There are but a few, as you said, and why there are so many companies, state companies, that deal with different services, and these are not monopolized. In the case of Totalizator Sportowy, this year Totalizator is going to have $500 million of profit. Some of it will be directed to the state budget. From all the companies, the state budget will receive several billion zlotys as dividends. The state budget, as we know, is pretty poor. We suffer from severe deficit, and Nothing has changed in the past 2 years in terms of organization. We changed people, directors, ministers, but in terms of institutions, not much has changed. And that may be the true reason why we have the monopoly and why we have such a great scale of state ownership. Thank you from the number. I didn't follow exactly, but I couldn't say it beforehand. The state monopoly today is also the possibility to use the sector to finance sport, culture. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the online casino where the state holds monopoly, this area is charged with 50% tax. For me, a free market economy is fighting for customers using all the tools. So I cannot imagine that if we release the market now, everybody says we do not advertise for these services. Then, why? Why not? It could be state regulated. Yes, but how should we fight for the customer to come to this or that entity? We would fight with the quality of service. The question is whether Totalizator Sportowy could offer the same quality of service as we do it today when we hold the monopoly. At this level of taxation, if we demonopolize the market, would the market actors be ready? We didn't say it today. We have this black market in gambling where they try to attract naive customers and they pay no taxes. So if we demonopolize and deregulate gambling, would those acting illegally today would be ready to pay 50% taxes? I don't think so. And when I watch the bookmakers services that are deregulated with similar taxation, there has been long appeal to reduce the taxes. Last year, over 5 billion zlotys was transferred from Totalizator Sportowy to finance sport and culture, which would never get there without this money. That may be an answer for you. But, Director, thank you for what you said. Again, we'll be back to what we are discussing. The gentleman is trying to ask how much of the state in every area. What is the money the state gets spent on? We can discuss it, but let us remember that this money is spent from the budget on our needs for roads, for the needs of people. And there was one more question. This time it needs to be the final one. We are almost out of time. Richard Pikuła, an entrepreneur from Łódź. Madam President, you partially answered my question when you said that you are a monopolist. You spend lots of money into the areas like sports, charity, culture. Gambling is, on the one hand, you sell dreams to people, and then gambling is addictive. Where is the mental border between that you do good for some people, but you do terrible things for some others? Short question, short answer. The short answer is that is why we do not encourage, we do not advertise, and we subordinate our offer to take care of mental health, to take care of safety of players. Our job, our mission is to build our offer in such a way that are on a current basis with the players. Gambling services, gambling world has always been here. It will stay with us. The point is, this entertainment should be provided safely. The organizer have monopoly over this stage and they say it's over. Thank you very much for being with us.
It can look like this, or like this. It is threatened, but it is our responsibility to protect it. For each person, it means something different. But when we reach it, we all know what it looks like, what it sounds like, or how it feels. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together. Freedom.
Do PKO Banku Polskiego przenosi się nowy klient.
Weź się. Przenieść się jest easy. Czaruś, wytłumacz.
Otwierasz konto w PKO Banku Polskim i masz święty spokój. Przeniosą kasę i zlecenia stałe, a pracodawcę poinformują. Ogarniesz to przez internet. Bo to dobry bank jest.
Ej, widzę cię. Wolisz w oddziale? Dawaj do nas.
Otwórz konto w PKO Banku Polskim i dołącz do 12 milionów klientów. PKO, twój bank polski.
Mam plan na bezpieczną firmę. To plan firmowy z cybertarczą, która blokuje zagrożenia w sieci.
Cyberbezpieczeństwo? Masz od tego Orange. Teraz cybertarcza za 0 zł we wszystkich planach firmowych, a w wybranych smartfony 50% taniej. Orange tu jest.
PL Music Video Awards, festiwal polskich wideoklipów, spotkania, projekcje, warsztaty, do tego gala finałowa i wybór najlepszych polskich teledysków. Zapraszamy do Łodzi 4-6 grudnia, szczegóły na www.plmva.com.
W kinie doceniam prawdziwe emocje.
Na boisku pilnuję czystej gry.
W kuchni poszukuję autentycznych smaków.
Ale w internecie jest to trudniejsze.
W internecie wobec informacji też trzeba być sędzią. Dezinformacja jest jak bramka strzelona ze spalonego.
Więc jeśli coś we mnie wzbudza emocje, daję sobie czas. Może ktoś specjalnie chce mnie zagotować, bym uległa manipulacji.
Filtruj informacje.
Sprawdzaj ich źródła.
Nie masz pewności? Nie udostępniaj.
Postaw na czysty przekaz.
Do zgłoszeń? Gotowi?
Start!
Ja zgłoszę bibliotekę!
Ja, pierwszy pasem w gminie.
Ja amfiteatr od naszej orkiestry. Wszystko w waszych rękach. Co powstanie dzięki wsparciu Totalizatora Sportowego w twojej okolicy? Zgłoś obiekt sportowy lub kulturalny. Wejdź na stronę gdygrasz.pl, bo gdy grasz, wszystko gra.
Telewizja Polska to więcej tego, co widzowie cenią najbardziej. Pasjonujące filmy i seriale, a w obsadzie najbardziej gorące nazwiska. Największe sportowe imprezy i momenty, które przejdą do historii. Bieżące wydarzenia, którymi żyje Polska i świat. Przebojowe koncerty, które łączą w zabawie wszystkich Polaków. Znakomite spektakle, które gromadzą rekordową publiczność. Telewizja Polska. Otwórz się na więcej.
Polska stolica kultury. Jesteś na miejscu.
Well, Atlas Network is, as the name suggests, a network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the U.S. It's a network, that is to say, organizations that share common values of limited government, of free enterprise, personal liberty, of personal responsibility.
Atlas Network provides training and support to help build capacity, but most importantly, we give our partners the tools they need to be successful.
Kiedy zapala się lampka on air, to jest najlepszy moment.
Nie ma jednego instrumentu, który lubię najbardziej. To zawsze jest kontekst.
Uwielbiam sport bez obrazu właśnie z tej perspektywy, kiedy to ja mogę ten obraz kreować.
Pusty stadion nie jest cichy. Tam gołębie startują.
Jak ja bym chciała, żeby z mojego radia było słychać "będzie okej".
Ono może być cichutko w tle. Radio, które jest przyjacielem tego odbiorcy, przyjacielem człowieka.
So we just had an emergency landing in Poland, in Łódź. Yeah, don't worry guys, we won't be here for long. Lads, hello vlog. So I know we were supposed to show you some wild animals and a bit more sun, but
yeah, instead we have to spend 2 days in this boring place.
Come on.
Did you say boring? I will show you beautiful nature and animals and even more. And you will see what this region has to offer. Deal?
So we said yes, because why not, right? And this girl took us around the whole region. We ate pierogies. We saw some Polish art. We saw some wild animals. We got spiritual. And after all, we fell in love with this place.
Myślisz, że to ktoś wyjątkowy, miłośnik kultury, kto sypie cytatami z pamięci. A to może być ktoś, kto na wakacje pakuje książkę, tę samą co rok temu. To możesz być ty. Bo czytanie nie jest dla wybranych, jest dla wszystkich. Podziel się tym.